It's Mrs. Feathers. This week you have your first instructional TDA. What that means is I will be walking you through every step of the TDA this week, and by the end of the week we will have an actual TDA response. On Monday, today, we will be reading our story for the first time. The story is called The Castle on Hester Street. It's a historical fiction story. We will also be deconstructing the prompt and looking for our two elements. On Tuesday, we will be beginning our evidence and inference chart. On Wednesday, we will finish up our evidence and inference chart and begin writing our response. On Thursday, we'll wrap everything up and finish up our TDA response. For today, we're going to start by building some background knowledge, deconstructing our prompt, and then reading the story for the first time. On Google Classroom, you have assigned to you Unit 2, Week 2, Instructional TDA, Grade 3. The first slide here is asking you, what does it mean to be rich and wealthy? When I think of being rich and wealthy, there's many ways to think about that. You can be rich and wealthy with money, or you can be rich and wealthy with people and your family. I would first like you to take a look at this picture here. What do you explicitly see in this picture? Meaning, what can you actually see in the picture? You are going to type some responses down in this box here. And what I'm asking you to type are things like, the man is busy at work. The man is sweating. The man has work piled up next to him. The second part of this picture, I'm asking you what inferences you can make. So things you can't see in the picture, but you can infer. So I might infer that this man is stressed. I can infer this because he's sweating, his face looks very stressed out. I could also infer maybe he is overworked. Maybe I can infer that he is rich. He has a very nice suit on and it looks like he's a hard worker. You're going to do the same thing with this second picture on slide 3. What can you explicitly see? I can explicitly see people working in a field. I can explicitly see that maybe they're not so rich and wealthy. Their clothes look tattered and torn. I can infer that these people are very hardworking. I can infer that maybe they're a little bit happier than that first man. They don't look as distressed as the man on slide 2. So again, you're going to type some explicit evidence, what you can see with your eyes, and some inferences about this picture. Your TDA prompt reads, in the story, The Castle on Hester Street, the character's actions support the central message. Write a paragraph analyzing how the central message of this historical fiction story is, family is more important than things. Use the character's actions as evidence to support your answer. So I picked up on some elements when reading through that prompt. I kept hearing character actions, so I'm going to move my red circle there. And I kept hearing central message, which we also call theme. So I'm going to move my second circle there. Next, we need to read our story. So I am going to read the story to you, and I need you to follow along. If you have your book at home, it starts on page 124. If you do not have your book at home, it is on your Google Classroom. You can see my screen here, and there is a PDF copy under The Castle on Hester Street Instructional TDA. Follow along as I read. One day, when Julie was visiting her grandparents, her grandfather said, "Did I ever tell you about my good friend Moshi?" "You told me about Herschel, the famous astronomer," Julie said with a giggle. "The one who discovered that the moon is a matzah." "And you told me about Bessie, your little cousin whose braids were so long she used them for jump ropes. But you never told me about Moshi." "Moshi the goat was from my village in Russia," Julie's grandfather said. "He pulled the wagon I rode in when I came to America. Not only could Moshi leap across oceans the way others jump over puddles, but he could also sing. We started singing the moment we left Russia. 9,092 miles to go. 9,092 miles to go. After we pass that small patch of snow, we'll have 9,091 miles to go." Julie was about to join in when her grandmother said, "Sol, what are you telling that child?" "A true story, just the way I remember it, Rose dear," Julie's grandfather said. "Moishi's wagon was solid gold. It shone like a shooting star when we flew over the ocean." "That's a story all right, but it's not true," Julie's grandmother said. "Grandpa came on a boat like I did. It was terrible. Hundreds of families were crowded together. Babies were crying. Bundles were piled over. The boat rocked so much I thought we would drown. But in Russia, life for Jews was very hard. We couldn't live or work where we wanted. Sometimes we were attacked just because we were Jews. We had to leave Russia any way we could." As her grandmother spoke, pictures grew in Julie's mind of her grandparents leaving their country and crossing a rough winter ocean on a boat so crowded they could hardly move. "Grandpa, is that how you really came?" Julie asked, looking sad. "Yes, it was," Julie's grandfather said. He, too, looked sad. Until he added, "But what a welcome I got when I arrived. President Theodore Roosevelt rode his horse through a blizzard of ticker tape to greet me. 'Hello, Sol,' he said. 'Mighty glad you could come.'" "Don't listen to another word," Julie's grandmother said. Grandpa's brother Morris met him. The boat docked first at Ellis Island. We sat for hours and waited to be inspected. Not everyone who came could stay. If you were sick, you had to go back. I was so afraid they would find something wrong with me, but thank God I passed every test. "Hooray!" Julie shouted. "Thank you, dear," Julie's grandmother said. She gave her a kiss and said, "I have something to show you." Then she went to the closet. Julie's grandfather leaned closer and whispered to Julie, "Everyone who came here was given a castle. Mine was on Hester Street. It was so tall the pigeons couldn't fly all the way up to the roof. I had to carry them there." Julie's grandmother came back to the sofa carrying a box. "Did Grandpa tell you about the horrible little room he shared with Louis, the cigar maker, and Herman, the tailor?" she asked as she sat down. In those days, people had to take in boarders to help them pay rent. Life was hard. Grandpa had a push cart. He sold buttons 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The only rest he got was on Sabbath. "Poor Grandpa," Julie said, and she patted his hand. Julie's grandfather was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "But what buttons I had! Buttons carved from diamonds, emeralds, and rubies. Buttons as big as saucers, buttons as big as plates, Buttons you could use to sled in the snow. Julie's grandmother sighed loudly. Grandpa sold small buttons, small enough to fit through buttonholes. I'll show you, she said as she opened the box. The box was filled with photographs. Julie's grandmother took out an old photograph in a cardboard frame. In it, Julie's grandfather stood next to his pushcart, which was full of little buttons. Grandpa looks so strong, Julie said, feeling proud. Julie's grandfather found a photograph of a young girl and showed it to Julie. This is a picture of your grandmother, he said. She was very famous in those days. Everyone spoke of Mr. Whitcon's beautiful daughter Rose, who stayed home all day nibbling chocolates. Her 5 big brothers had to watch so that nobody stole her away. I worked 6 days a week in a factory then, sewing dresses. But I was very pretty, Julie's grandmother said, smoothing her hair. You are still very pretty, Julie's grandfather said, and he kissed her cheek. In Russia, your grandmother sewed for royalty. She made stitches so small they couldn't be seen. People wondered how the dresses stayed together. That part is true, Julie's grandmother said proudly. As soon as I met your grandmother, I wanted to marry her, Julie's grandfather said. Every night I hired fireflies to fly over her house and spell out, Rose, my precious flower, I love you every hour. And Moishi and I sang love songs under her window. Finally, her father let me marry her. A year later, your mother was born. No one had ever seen such a beautiful child. Then Esther, Ruthie, and Benny were born, and they were just as beautiful. I made them tiny jeweled crowns, and they rode through the streets in hand-carved golden baby carriages. Enough is enough, Julie's grandmother said. From now on, I insist that Julie hear only the truth. Grandpa and I had to work even harder to feed all those babies, but we didn't mind. We had something more valuable than jeweled crowns and golden baby carriages. We had each other, and we were free to live as we wanted. That's the truth, Rose dear, Julie's grandfather said. And from now on, that's all that will pass through my lips. They sat quietly for a few minutes. Then Julie's grandfather smiled and whispered to Julie, Did I ever tell you about the time Mushi the goat and I sang for President Wilson? So that's the end of the story for today. Sorry, just Xing out all my tabs. That will be the first time that you look at the story. Tomorrow, I will ask that you reread that story before you begin the assignment with me. I hope you enjoyed it and enjoyed Julie's grandfather and all of his exaggerations. I'll see you tomorrow, 3rd grade.